Hello, everyone. Welcome to America. Some assembly required. It's Tuesday again. Happy Tuesday. It is June the 17th, 2025. Anna has joined us, and we're going to be talking about the International Business Assembly some more today, along with a good overview of our Constitution, because we need to understand what is theirs, what is ours. So I'm going to bring Anna onto the stage. And hi, Anna. How are you?
Oh, well, I haven't made much progress on my desk since yesterday, but I've
Well,
got
it looks a little less tall. A little.
you know, it's just a matter of having the time to do these things. This is kind of a back office arrangement here that I have at home. So it's just this little corner space that everything sort of pushes to this. And it's not a very big space at all. So it tends to get cluttered.
So, Anna, I've got a kind of a hot question I'm going to put up on the screen real quick from someone who is out of the country looking for some assistance. Says, Anna, I'm on a cruise ship. We are in Mexico at port. The passengers are off the ship, and emergency broadcast system says you have 12 hours to return to your home / ship. What jurisdiction are we in?
Thank you. You're at sea if you're out in the coastal waters or the deep sea. In port, you're kind of in a quasi land between land and sea, maritime. So if you're actually on the ship, you're always under the captain's direction. Always. Uh, if you're off the ship on the land, well, then that's a dual jurisdiction there. So it just kind of depends on where you're physically located. Now, as for the 12 hours to return to your home, you're aware that there is, number one, a war going on in the Middle East. And number two, there's a considerable domestic upheaval because of all the effort to expel people who have illegally immigrated. And so between those two things, there have been a lot of diplomatic missions and a lot of different kinds of things going on that we don't normally see. And there are definitely efforts being made to, number one, get people to safety where they're not going to be attacked, for example. We don't normally think about this, but when we go out and we travel in foreign countries, some of those foreign countries and people there may not agree with different policies that the politicians have put in place, and they may attack us as being the only visible representation of that power that they can identify. So, it becomes more dangerous for people to travel abroad during times of unrest and political strife. And I'm aware that a lot of U.S. embassies are basically on lockdown. I'm aware that there are very serious travel advisories. And Mexico may not be the best place to be right now simply because we have this immigration problem, and Mexico has contributed to it significantly with their policies. And as a result, I think that's good advice to get home, beat your feet home, even though you've been dreaming of this Mexico vacation or this cruise ship vacation for a while. Return to port.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a lot of times when people, when they travel, they don't realize that they're basically in some ways at the mercy of the country they're in. And, it's probably best to beat feet back to the ship and, unfortunately, spending your time there where you're under the jurisdiction of however that ship is flagged.
Right.
And so, the travel advisories that are out there are very serious. And it's something that we've taken for granted for many years, the luxury of a peaceful travel in most places. But right now, it's probably just really not a good idea.
Right. And American tourists have been the targets of attacks in the past, as you may recall.
Mhm.
There have been some really nasty incidents with pirates taking ships, and there have been nasty incidents where groups of tourists have been targeted by different kinds of political factions who have kidnapped them and attacked them in various ways. So uh, when things are like this, it's best to stay home.
Yeah.
And they're even, to an extent, they're trying to keep people from going into crowded places. The riots have created crowds. In LA especially, uh, and when they have crowds, that's an excellent opportunity for them to unleash biological weapons.
Mhm.
And so they're trying to get these crowds to go home, you know, and people think that it's because of the issue, and it's not. It's for safety. You need to be at home so that you're not presenting a target for a biological warfare attack, and so that you're not endangered as being one of those that's infected with something.
Right.
And so, they're actively trying to get people to go home and stay home, and it's for good reasons. So, uh, try to limit your activity there. Uh, just a second.
Yeah, and head on a swivel. You need to be
No, we can
paying
stay here.
paying great attention to the area and who's in the area and where you are to get yourself back. Unfortunately, right now the conditions between our country and Mexico, there's many of the cartels that are not very happy with us, and there's been a lot of um, actions towards tourists. So please be careful. All right.
Well, tourists give a good option, a good target for hostage taking, and hostages are always very valuable. So
Right.
don't make yourself into a target.
Right.
Show some restraint in your travel and in your activities that more than you would normally do. Keep your head up and look for things. Keep aware of your environment. Um, Certainly, young people are more desirable as hostages than old people. But everybody needs to be aware.
That's right. Okay. Well, Anna, thank you very much for addressing that. And we're going to move into what our topic of the day was, which International Business Assembly. And we were going to talk about the Constitution. So my question is, Constitution for the United States first or the Constitution of the United States?
Well, we got 3 different constitutions. One of them has been dormant since 1861, so we hardly ever hear about it or think about it, but that is the actual original federal constitution. And it was issued first because it was issued to the American subcontractor, and the American subcontractor had the preponderance of the duties expressed in the Constitution. Now, that Constitution is the Constitution for the United States of America. And another strange thing about this is that the U on United is in small case. So it's used as an adjective. It's not used as part of the name. Okay? The actual name, um, that header is wrong. It should be Constitution for the United States with a small u on United, because it's being used as an adjective. It's not part of the name. States of America was the organization that actually received the Constitution as a service contract. So States of America was the doing business name of the federation that we always think of when we see the Articles of Confederation. Okay? So the Articles of Confederation came before the Federal Republic, and it was the Confederation that ran the Federal Republic and which received the actual constitutional contract to do the work. Okay, so the Confederation received the constitutional contract, the service contract, of this Constitution that was issued in 1787. It was doing business as the States of America. And so that's why when you see the Constitution for the United with a small u States of America, they're literally saying, okay, well, here's the Constitution for the States of America vendor. Okay, that's what they're meaning and saying there. Okay, so this was issued in 1787. It hasn't been changed since 1861. There are no amendments to it since then. But one of the queer things about this particular Constitution is that it does contain a different 13th Amendment.
Yes, it does.
And that 13th Amendment is called the Titles of Nobility Amendment, which was added to the Constitution, to this particular first 1787 federal Constitution in 1819. Now, I think it's important for people to understand that there is a difference between an organization acting as a federation and an organization acting as a confederation. And I spent some time and wrote an article about this just this past week so that people would begin to think about it a little bit differently than they have been. When you're acting as a federation, you have your members, and the members are acting as separate entities, as in when we have our states as they presently are. Our states are in session. They have a voice, each one of them, for themselves, and they can operate independently. They can, consider issues, and they can take votes, and those votes can be recorded by roll call. And as a group, they can act by this process of roll call vote. And so that's basically a federation. A federation will take roll call votes of the members. The federation will be interacting with each member state individually. A federation will be more aware of different issues that are possibly divisive, and it will be dealing with those issues to the extent that the federation can possibly act to expedite or explain or assist or help. But a confederation, by contrast, is where you have a group of member states that are all acting together as one entity, as one instrumentality. And this becomes important when you have a situation that is of mutual concern and the individual states all want to act as one voice. Okay, and we all know that there are issues that the constitutional delegations of power are designed to operate in that fashion, right? So we're all going together and we're all saying this. That's when you have a confederation. That's when you bring in all the members and they're supposed to be acting as a united force, as one voice for all these many different members. And so then you have an organization acting as a confederation when that happens. And I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding between federation and confederation. But that's essentially it. Whether the members are acting independently as separate states, in this case, or if they're acting together as one voice and one united body. Um, and so when we look at that 1787 Constitution, we're looking at an organization that is being created and run to fulfill the terms of this particular service contract. And we call that instrumentality, that organization that's newly created that's going to fulfill this service contract, the Federal Republic, right? But the organization that is operating the Federal Republic is the States of America, which was our original confederation that was formed under the Articles of Confederation. All right, is this making sense?
Yes, it makes sense to me.
Okay, so then the other aspect of this that we, no dear, nope. Dogs, cats, everybody. That's the problem with the home office. You know, you got this constant flow of everything going on around you.
Sure.
So the 1787 Constitution is a subject that we need to delve into, and we all need to understand more about, simply because we commonly don't really understand that we have this other additional constitution. It's just dormant. And it's dormant because the organizations that gave it life are dormant. The original Confederation basically stopped doing business in 1861 and never resumed doing business. And that then meant that the Federal Republic couldn't do business because its sponsoring organization, which actually held the contract, was not operational.
Right.
Okay, so now you have why the 1787 Constitution is dormant. And this is what people are talking about when they talk about reconstructing the American government. Because both the Confederation and the Federal Republic that it operated are out of business. They're dormant. They're in la la land. Nobody, they're gone. And so this is what they're talking about when they say that our government is absent and that our government is in interregnum. That's what they're talking about, is that part of our government. We basically have a 6-cylinder engine and we lost 2 cylinders. All right. So that 1787 Constitution becomes very important when we look at what's gone on since then. And also it becomes very important in terms of what we have to do now to get things back in order. All right. So I wanted to spend some time telling you about this, and also to point out the Titles of Nobility Amendment that is part of that original 1787 Constitution, called the Constitution for the United, with a small u, States of America. The Titles of Nobility Amendment was actually an amendment that was added after the War of 1812 because of concerns about members of the Bar Association. And basically what had happened is that when we wrote the Constitution originally, there's a general prohibition contained in the very original 1787 version that provides that members of our government cannot be in conflict of interest and can't accept titles and emoluments from foreign governments and princes. So this was to prevent foreign governments from coming in and currying favor with Americans and possibly members of our government then being in conflict of interest because they're trying to serve two masters. And so there was always this prohibition against accepting titles and emoluments and that sort of thing from foreign governments. Then in the years after the War of 1812, the move became more serious because that original prohibition did not contain teeth. It said generally, in kind of a general way, okay, you're not supposed to have titles and emoluments. You're not supposed to take bribes from foreign governments. All right, fine. But it didn't provide for any particular punishment for this. It didn't say, okay, you shouldn't take titles and bribes from foreign governments because if you do, then this is going to happen. And then the amendment puts the teeth into that prohibition, and it provides for various degrees of punishment if any member of our government accepts a title or what they call an emolument from a foreign government, a king or prince. And basically, you can be deported, you can lose your job, and there are very other nasty things, but otherwise, it was an amendment to put teeth into the prohibition against accepting emoluments and titles from foreign governments. And that did pass. Virginia was the last state to ratify it, and they ratified in 1819, and it was made part of the federal constitution, the 1787 Constitution, shortly thereafter. We have the ratification records from the states, and so we know that the TONA did pass, and that it was ratified, and that it was added to the federal constitution, the 1787 Constitution we've been discussing, but it was not added to the two other constitutions.
Right.
Okay. So everybody always wonders, well, whatever happened to the original 13th Amendment? Well, it was a 13th Amendment to the 1787 Constitution, to the American Vendors Constitution, and it remains a prohibition and an amendment to the 1787 Constitution. However, since that Constitution has lain dormant and collecting dust on a windowsill for the past 160 years, it hasn't come into effect, has it?
No. I have a copy of that, Anna, and what I'm finding is this Constitution for the United States, where the title is wrong.
There you go.
It doesn't. Yeah. It's on page. Let's see if I can find it. I think it's on 17.
Additional amendments.
There's additional amendments. So that one. Let's see if I can find it. Okay, it's right here. So
they said that, as it says, it was proposed many years before, actually, and then it was ratified under duress in 1868 to this Constitution, but no, the original was passed in 1819.
yeah,
See
there it is. So it's at the bottom of the page here, and it says proposed in 1810.
Yep.
Probably, and of course this is from constitution.org, so it says probably ratified 1819, and it says if any citizens of the United States shall accept, claim, receive, or retain any title of nobility or honor, or shall, without the consent of Congress, accept and retain any present, pension, office, or emolument of any kind whatever from any emperor, king, prince, foreign power, such person shall cease to be a citizen of the United States and shall be incapable of holding any office of trust or profit under them or either of them.
So it's a pretty broad spectrum prohibition against possible conflict of interest. And it does have one exit clause, in that you could, if you were being offered something, if you were being offered a present, you could get permission from Congress. But without that permission, you could be basically stripped of your citizenship. And we've all learned what citizenship is, right?
Right.
Which would automatically mean that you could no longer serve in the government. So it's
Right.
a strong prohibition. It has teeth, and it has a specific punishment attached to it. And it was added to the Constitution in 1819. And it's the federal Constitution that it was added to. And that's what people miss, is that it was added to the 1787 Constitution that we don't see. I mean, after 160 years, nobody's publishing copies of this in books anymore and making them available in bookstores. And as a result, people aren't aware of it. And that's why it's such a confusion as to, where did TONA go? Where did the Titles of Nobility Amendment go? Well, it was never part of the Constitution of the United States of America. It was never part of the Constitution of the United States. It was only and ever part of the Constitution for the United States of America, which was the American federal vendor. So,
Right. So
now
recently we had the flap in Congress about the airplane that was given, right?
right,
And now everybody knows why, because Congress had to accept that. They were not going to let Trump accept that on his own. Congress had to accept it as a gift to them, correct?
right, right, exactly. And so, the original prohibition is much the same, except that it doesn't give a specific punishment. So it was just an extension of a prohibition that already existed, and the purpose was to establish the loss of citizenship and office as the punishment. Okay, so now I think everybody has this firmly in mind, that the original Constitution that was issued in 1787 was a separate contract. It was the contract issued to the American subcontractor. The American federal subcontractor was the Confederation, operating as the States of America, and that's why the title is the way it is. That's why the U on United is small. It's being used as an adjective, but the actual name of the organization and the business name of the Confederation at that point was States of America. And we've also learned that a confederation is when all the separate members act together as one and have an organization that operates on that basis.
Right.
All right. So the Confederation ran what? It ran the Federal Republic using the Constitution for the United States of America that was issued in 1787. There's just one other really important thing that people need to know. The Federal Republic operated as the United States, with a small t on the and upper lowercase United States. Now this gets very confusing, because just a few years before, during the war and during the aftermath of the peace process and everything, the original colonies did business as the United States.
Right. It was a trading company.
Right. And so if you don't know that, it can be confusing to consider which United States are you talking about. And in a little bit, another 3 years, things are going to get even more confusing, because the municipal subcontractor is also going to be operating as the United States. So this one name is being used by two federal subcontractors. And it gets very confusing. Maybe it was meant to be confusing.
On purpose. Confusing on purpose.
Yeah, well, and really, folks, being aware that there's a confusion about which United States you're talking about and when that United States was in operation is critical to your understanding of what's going on and who's on base. So keep it in your mind that from 1776 to 1790, it was the original states, the colonies and the states that were operating as the United States.
Right.
And after that, we have the Federal Republic operating as the United States. And we have the municipal subcontractor operating as the United States. And on top of that, we have a country calling itself the United States.
Right.
All right. So pay attention to the time period that's being referenced. If it's between 1776 and 1790, the United States has one meaning.
Right.
And after that, it could have three
Multiple.
meanings.
Right.
Plus, the country is being called the United
States of America. Yeah, that's the hard part as we read through documents. You read through law, you read through the various citations in history where they're not really specific about which United States. I always tell everybody, I get these phone calls sometimes that go, "Oh my gosh, I'm at the motor vehicles bureau renewing my driver's license, and they want to know if I'm a United States citizen." And I always laugh and I ask, "Well, did they tell you which one?" Because there are 357 variations of the United States today.
Yes.
And if they're and I always say, if they haven't specified which one, I said, then you mean yours, right? So intent, right?
Right.
It's intent.
Is it these United States or those United States?
Exactly. You see, semantic deceit works in both directions.
Right. And it's very convenient.
Mm-hmm.
Very convenient. But when you're on the record, then it becomes more clear which United States you belong to.
That's exactly right.
And if you're aware that there are all these different versions of United States swirling around, and you're prepared mentally for this reality, it's much easier to navigate all the different ins and outs of things that are presented to you and to be able to answer intelligently if you're challenged. Because if you walk into this and you don't know that, hey, there are 4 principal meanings of United States and an additional 353 versions of United States out there, folks, it's just best to know these things and teach your kids so that you're not caught left-handed and wondering what's going on.
Right. That's right. And it's really helpful for us to understand that. And, within our international business assemblies, our citizens need to realize what Constitution we're looking at, what it says, what they're supposed to be doing, what they're not supposed to be doing, and how we're going to address that as we go forward. We were having a discussion this morning, and I said, just imagine for a minute that, in our current numbers, in our current condition, that our state went, okay, great, the Ohio Assembly, it's your turn. You think you can run it better? We're done. Bloom. And I said, what will we do with that? How would we operate it? How do we have the numbers to assume that business, and everybody kind of goes back and they go, oh, I said, that's the point of gradual change within and the gradual influence that our states assemblies need to have as we work them back from being way out here to get them to come back into their box, right?
Right. Right. And this is a very delicate and dangerous operation because everybody has to know who they are. Everybody has to act peaceably and appropriately. And everybody has to learn these basic facts so that we're no longer just shadow boxing. Okay. The patriot movement in this country has struggled for many years to get this kind of clarity and to have this ability to act in power based on knowledge. And so we're now here at the point where, yes, we know exactly what happened. We know when it happened. We know who did it. We have everything that we need to properly ascertain our position, our identity, our provenance. We know all the different tricks that were used to misidentify us and to keep us from basically assuming our position as inheritors of this country. Okay, so we know, and now that we know, now we can act and go forward on a solid basis. Before we were kind of in quicksand. Every time we turned around, there was some new thing that we didn't know, and we had to research it constantly. Well, we're now at the point where we know, and we can teach, and we can learn, and we can be sure that we're standing on terra firma. And that's why this is so important. That's why this organization is so important, because there's still a bunch of organizations out there that are floundering around trying to figure out who they are, where they are, and they're making.
I mean, they are.
Yeah.
So.
And so they may be well intentioned, but
Right.
they just don't have the background and the facts that they need to be effective. Like we have all these national assemblies. Okay. Well, if they really knew what they were doing and they knew who they are, I guarantee you that most of the people in those organizations don't intend to act as Tories.
Right.
And yet, when they're proclaiming national assemblies, that's what they're doing. Okay, so that, I think we got 1787 down in our minds now, but we have two more to go.
Right.
Okay. In 1789, 2 years later, another constitution was issued. And that had to be somewhat confusing to people at the time, because here's 1787, we just had this new constitution. We just voted on that and it's in. And okay, so what's going on? Why are we having another constitution in 1789? Well, many people then and now made the natural assumption that, okay, well, we signed off on this in 1787 and now we're coming back 2 years later and voting on it again. They thought that there was a progression going on here where the 1787 Constitution had been amended in some way, and now we were voting on the Constitution, the same Constitution 2 years later. But no, 2 years later, we were voting on a completely different Constitution with a different name. And its name is the Constitution of the United States of America. And the Constitution of the United States of America has a different name and a different year for a very simple reason. It was issued to a different service vendor. It was issued to the British Territorial United States. Okay, so what's the British Territorial United States? Well, it's the territories and possessions that we always know are out there somewhere, right? But we don't always think of it as being British. And we don't always think of it in terms of being the territorial government. Nonetheless, that's the way it's always been set up. And when 1789 rolled around and we had different services that we wished to procure in the jurisdiction of the sea, we turned to our own little enclave of British interest and gave the contract, the service contract in those areas, to them.
Well, if you look back at the history in that time, Anna, um, the Spanish were in Florida. They were pushing on Georgia. The French were in Louisiana trying to work their way up the Mississippi. They wanted to get Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
And so they couldn't turn to either of those countries to provide service. And their big concern was protecting our borders, especially our sea coasts, from the French Navy or the Spanish Armada, right? And so it was really there. It was kind of like, oh, I guess we have to kind of go do business with the British because,
right.
We've already beat them, right? So
well, there was that, but there was also the fact that, yes, Britain and France were actively at war.
Mm-hmm, that's it.
And we were viewed as British sympathizers by the French.
Mm-hmm.
And so, since we were under the British sphere of influence, so far as the French were concerned, and the Brits and the French were at war, the French were attacking our merchant ships. The French were sinking our merchant ships, and they were commandeering our merchant ships. And it was really playing havoc with our shipping and our ability to get our products to market in Europe. Because remember, at that point in our history, America was basically not producing much in terms of finished goods.
Right.
We were producing raw materials. We were producing cotton. We were producing timber. We were producing minerals. We were even shipping manure. We were shipping manure to Europe, okay? Which is that's where we get our famous word, shipping in high transit. Because when you're shipping manure, the methane can build up and it becomes explosive.
Right.
And if it gets wet. And so when these manure ships would take off, they had to stage their cargo up above the bilge so that it didn't get wet and turn explosive.
Right.
But yes, we were actually shipping manure to Europe in large quantities at that time. Okay, and so just the background there. But anyway, our merchant shipping was being torn to bits. And of course, we didn't have a navy to speak of. Our navy was in its infancy. And the Brits had the most advanced, most deadly navy on the high seas.
Right.
So it was a natural outgrowth of that situation that we agreed as part of the peace process and everything that went forward, the treaty processes, that the King of Britain would be our trustee on the high seas and navigable inland waterways. And this is just shortly after the revolution, so people are kind of shocked. But this is the situation that we faced, and this is how we resolved it, was by making this agreement with the British. And so the king became our trustee on the high seas and navigable inland waterways. And the British Navy took over the task of protecting the American merchant fleet. Mm-hmm. And this is very much the situation that leads into the 1789 Constitution and how they became vendors of services under that Constitution. Was this quid pro quo that we had established with the British again, all right, just a few years down the road. And what you see in the 1789 Constitution is that not only do we have this relationship with the Brits again, but the Brits are the ones that control the jurisdiction of the sea. And this has been an organizational, I guess you could say, organizational purpose for the British monarchy since the days of King Henry VIII. And they have been the lords of the sea, and the Spanish have been the lords of the land for generations and centuries because of the way the Catholic Church set up the entire monarchy system.
Right.
So the Brits already had a major position, well established for hundreds of years, as the experts on matters of sea lore and sea law and sea everything, sea lanes, sea traditions, everything the Brits had. And so it was natural, under the circumstance we've described for you, that the Brits took over the seagoing law and the seagoing functions. And the 1789 Constitution, while it includes basically the same provisions of all the other constitutions, was meant to allow them to be able to function in these capacities at sea and to deal with sea law. And that's why you see the adaptation of the 1789 Constitution is adopted and then it's adapted.
Right.
And suddenly you see the Judiciary Act splits off the sea courts from the land courts because that's going to be handled under the provisions of the 1789 Constitution and under the British subcontractors.
Right. And there and the 1789 Constitution is where we see the 19 enumerated powers, basically their obligation, the 19th being the obligation to uphold our Bill of Rights and our Declaration of Independence. But they're very narrowly defined powers, delegated powers that they were given, right?
Mm-hmm.
And since then, they've overstepped their boundaries quite a bit. And but they're very, everybody, they need to look at those in terms of what they can do and what they can't do in terms of their international business assembly and how they're doing business. What's relegated to the federal, and then you're going to get to the state, to the municipal constitution, basically, the 1790, and what is delegated into that 1790 constitution. So that we uphold both sides of we're holding them, but we also have to hold ourselves to those constitutions and the concepts that we contracted or conducted them into.
Well, really, there's another scheme people need to be aware of here. And I don't know how many people have ever thought about this, but the third constitution, let's move on to that, was adopted in 1790. And this was the Constitution of the United States. You can still go down to a local bookstore and either pick up or order copies of both the Constitution of the United States of America, which was issued in 1789, and the Constitution of the United States, which was issued in 1790. All right? So I want you to be thinking about these three different contracts, three different service contracts, three different vendors, issued in 3 different years. All right? But there's more to it than that. They were issued in different jurisdictions. Okay? So what you've got is the 1787 Constitution was land. The 1789 jurisdiction was sea. And the 1790 jurisdiction was air. So you have 3 different vendors, 3 different service contracts, 3 different jurisdictions. And the contracts themselves are very similar, and they all mention the same enumerated services and powers, okay? But it's understood by the people at the time that one was for the land, one was for the sea, and one was for the air. We no longer understand that. The structure of that quid pro quo and that knowledge base has evaporated. Hardly anybody now knows that that was the structure of the entire contractual operation.
That's right.
Okay, so what happens? All of a sudden, it's 1861, and the vendor, the American vendor, the Federal Republic, is suddenly gone, out of business. All of the functions, the land jurisdiction functions, which is by far the majority of the functions delegated under the Constitution, are now hanging, flapping in the wind. And all those juicy contracts to perform services are hanging loose, flopping in the wind.
That's right.
So, what do our 2 European subcontractors, the Brits and the Holy Roman Empire, do? Do they go out to the American people and say, hey, we got a problem here, folks, let's fix this? Oh, no. Oh, no. They do everything they possibly can to obscure the entire situation, to bury it, and to provide themselves with an excuse to basically go in over here and commandeer all of the contracts, the service contracts, that naturally and actually belong to the Federal Republic and the states of America.
That's right.
And so we've got British coming in doing land jurisdiction jobs. We've got the Holy Roman Empire nuzzling its way forward like the camel with its nose in the tent, trying to get its share of all this juicy contract work that they can potentially snare. All right? And that's what they did. They went in and they, both of the European subcontractors, divvied up the land jurisdiction service contracts that were left vacated by the Federal Republic going out of business. And they started providing services that they were never supposed to provide. And they claimed that they were doing this on an emergency basis.
Of course.
And that's why you keep hearing all the time, oh, the president declared an emergency and he declared another emergency. Well, he's working for the Brits, right? So of course he's going to declare an emergency every 2 years, and he's going to declare war every 2 years to keep this farce going. But what really needs to happen is for us Americans to wake up, get our ducks in order, and restore our land jurisdiction subcontractor.
Right.
Which means us, we Americans, restore our American subcontractor to do the land jurisdiction duties, at which point we can turn to the Brits and say, sorry, the emergency's over. Bye. Actually, we're doing that even now, but that's a different aspect of this.
Right.
Let's just consider that these 2 foreign European subcontractors, the Brits that had the 1789 Constitution, and the Holy Roman Empire, which received the 1790 Constitution and was basically only supposed to provide a very limited number of services, have come in here and eaten up all the service contracts that the 1787 Constitution naturally provided.
Right. Well, that was part of my point to the Ohio Assembly this morning, to our little group, our Tuesday morning group. That's sort of like our town hall discussion. But, you know, the idea that we all have to pick up our end and do so. And when we don't get engaged, with our, if we're able to be on the International Business Assembly and we're able to start getting ourselves tuned into this, so that someday when we're able to have the numbers that we can assume and revive basically our subcontractors. If suddenly our subcontractors just went by, there would be chaos. It would be complete chaos, and it would give them a plausible excuse to blame us for the chaos. And so we have to do this in a way that is kind of thoughtful and measured, non-combative, and get them back in and start to get them in and get them used to us and keep pushing them in and pushing them in and pushing them in till we're ready to assume those duties that we're taking away from them and putting them back in their boxes.
Okay, well, now we're on to the next part of the story. Okay. Because what they did was illegal, unlawful, and immoral. Okay. They shouldn't have come in and pushed their nose into the tent and started doing all of these services that were delegated to a different contractor. Okay. It would be like, hiring a guy to take care of your fleet of cars and hiring another guy to mow your lawn and take care of your garden, and then hiring another guy to be your housekeeper. Okay. So the guy who's hired to do your lawn mowing and hedge trimming and tree pruning gets sick. He gets cancer. He dies. The contract that he had to provide all these lawn services and garden services is left vacated, flapping in the wind. So without telling you, the housekeeper decides, well, I can do that. It's good money. It's something I can do if I have to. And, that's an opportunity there. So I'm going to set up my own little thing on the side, and I'm going to take over doing these duties. And, I'm going to be running the whole show here. I'm going to be running the house, and I'm going to be taking care of the yard and garden, and I'm going to be billing the homeowner for all of this, and I'm going to be raking it in, right? Well, meantime, the third guy who's taking care of your garage and your fleet of cars pokes his nose out and says, hey, what's going on? Why are you taking over, the yard and garden and everything? Oh, well, Jose over here and his company went out of business. So you just kind of took over the yard and garden contract, huh? But you didn't really have a separate contract to do that, did you? You didn't really have permission from the homeowner to go over here and take over the yard and garden. Hey, let me in. I want a piece of the action. So now all of a sudden the guy who's doing the cars and taking care of the garage and all that is out there doing a little yard work on the side himself. Okay, he's going to take over the pruning business. And so this is how they did it. The two European subcontractors were highly motivated to pick up those extra contracts, not only because they could perform these services then and get the money, but because they could gain coercive power. By providing these services and extending their reach and their influence and their ability to control, they were also getting a tremendous increase in power because they were never meant to provide those services.
Right.
They were supposed to be in their little box providing sea services and air services. They were never supposed to be over here providing land services. And so what are we talking about when we say land services? Well, we're talking about all those things that naturally are land jurisdiction functions, like surveying the land. USGS, that's supposed to be a land function. Department of Agriculture, that's supposed to be a land function. Department of Labor, that's supposed to be a land function. The U.S. Mint, that's supposed to be a land function. The United States Treasury, that's supposed to be a land function. All those things are supposed to be land functions. All the Foreign Service, the Diplomatic Corps, supposed to be a land function, not a sea function.
Mhm.
So you see, the British, by coming in and taking over our land jurisdiction functions, gained a huge amount of influence and coercive power that they were never intended to have. They gained control of our money. They gained control of our credit. They gained control of our foreign trade policies. They gained control of our land survey.
Right.
They just came in and they started doing all these services with no contract to do them, you understand, other
Our
than
agriculture, our food, all of that
right,
that's controlled. Right.
right. And so this is how they took over, very quietly, very secretly, very, sneakily. And they told the rest of the world that our government had just disappeared. They didn't know where we went. We were in absentia. We were in interregnum, and our government was vacant there. All of a sudden it wasn't there, and so they just had to come in on an emergency basis. And their little snakely bodies are, they're going into Washington, D.C. and coiling around and basically taking over these contracts, these service contracts that they were never supposed to have. And that's how they've gotten in, and that's how they've stayed in for 160 years. And because the public was never told any of this, because the public was kept in the dark about all of these cozy arrangements that our foreign subcontractors were making for themselves, the homeowners in our story are just going along. Well, as far as the homeowner can see, the house is getting cleaned, the yard and the garden are taken care of, the garage is in great shape, the cars are kept up. As far as the homeowner is concerned, they don't know that Jose's business went out of. They just they
Until
have
the
no.
price starts going up, right?
Yeah, right. But no, if you're the homeowner in this situation and you're dealing with these subcontractors and you're still getting billed and the services are still being provided, you don't necessarily know that all this has happened, especially when, in our little example, the business that you started out with was called Jose's Yard and Garden Service, right? And instead, you get a bill from Josie's Yard and Garden Service. The name is close enough, so you could possibly just, assume it was the same services you always had.
Right.
So they basically fooled us, hoodwinked us, into thinking that all was well, and that everything was the same as it was. But actually, our government had been commandeered and taken over by the Brits and the Holy Roman Empire. And nobody was the wiser outside of their little circle until we came along and we figured it all out. And we started talking to other countries. We started talking to the governments of places like Chile and South Africa and Japan. And all of a sudden, we find out that they have a completely different take on our history and who we are and everything about it, because they've been told for a long, long time that our government disappeared. Nobody knew where we were. And we were in interregnum. And the Brits were representing us. There's that word, representing us.
Mm.
And so imagine our surprise to be told that we were dead and gone, and everybody thought we were forever, lost at sea.
Right. Right. Pretty amazing.
Right. So we got an earful from other countries, and we also got an earful from Karen Hoods, who is not necessarily our best friend because she was a Brit and a barrister, But nonetheless, she had the integrity and the guts enough to tell us that, hey, yeah, they've got you all set up to be abandoned. They say that you haven't showed up in 150 years, and even for a government, that's completely reckless. So we're declaring all of your assets to be abandoned property.
Mm.
And to be, fresh meat and game for all the creditors of the United States Incorporated and the United States of America Incorporated. So what our feckless foreign subcontractors had done is they went out and they ginned up this huge debt for us. And then they stood back and they were going to offer our land, our businesses, our resources, and us as property, as living property, livestock. They were going to offer all of the resources and assets, our labor, everything, to their creditors, which was principally China. And they had this all ginned up, ready to go. China was going to come in here and take over and have all the land it wanted and all the resources it wanted. And the Brits didn't care. Why should they? They're over in Europe. Their homes and their investments and everything are in Europe. And the Holy Roman Empire didn't care. I mean, once again, this looks like a good opportunity to them because all those Chinese are going to be over here, intermixed with all the Americans. And so this is an opportunity for the Catholic Church to grow. And they don't really care, as long as everybody is here, they're just going to be making their pitch for Jesus. And so they didn't really care if the Chinese or if it was Chinese or Americans here, all the same to them. And so they had this all set up. They were going to come in here under these false pretenses, and they were going to do this forced migration thing. They were going to start the forced migration with a migration of Canadians and Mexicans to form a regional government. And then they were, a few years down the line, going to start all this mass migration from China.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had this whole North American Union planned, and it was presented in a very innocuous way that this was going to be a new level of basically organization within the post office. And they were going to form a new region in the postal system so that they could divvy up mail going to this region or that region and that's perfectly okay. That's innocuous. We don't care how the Postal Service organizes its business. But when they did that, it created another level in the Postal Service system, right? And that immediately then created an opportunity to form what? A regional government.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so this is why George W. Bush signed on to the North American Union Treaty. And the North American Union they were talking about the Postal Service. Okay. But it also meant that for the purposes of postal service, the borders would be erased. And immediately, the Brits seized upon this brilliant idea and took it literally. It wasn't just a matter of reorganizing how the Postal Service distributes mail. Suddenly it was, oh, well, we have this excellent opportunity to be land grabbers and to merge this entire, North American continent into one big regional government.
Right.
And that's what the Brits have been working at steadily ever since. And you will notice that we now have Wexit on our lap, or in our lap, where the western provinces of Canada want to join the United States and leave Pierre Trudeau in the dust. And we can't, not Pierre, Justin Trudeau, in the dust. I'm showing my age. And so all these provinces of Western Canada want to be accepted as states of the Union. And this is for real, folks. It's called Wexit, Wexit,
Right.
Wexit, W for West and exit, Wexit. Um, this is a huge initiative, and there are a lot of Canadians that want to join the United States as states of the Union, so that we would have the state of Alberta, right? And the
But
state
not
of
the Eastern Canadians. It's the Western Canadians.
right. The
There's
Eastern Canadians don't want anything to do with this. Ontario and Nova Scotia and all the eastern states want to maintain their Frenchy government.
That's right. That's right.
So,
So this was a progression of governments, Anna. And you can kind of see this when they had their 2020 plan, their 2030 plan, and their 2050 plan. If you look those up, you'll see exactly, and that's also where it embedded the 15-minute cities, the reorganization of residential areas. It was a dastardly plan.
right.
So, yeah,
It's going down in flames, but it was a dastardly plan.
yes,
And Mexico, of course, Mexico has always been problematic because Mexico has a large population. It's a very Catholic country, and they have a large population of people and limited resources.
very.
And so Mexico has always been looking over our border as going, jobs, land,
Water.
arable land, pasturage, water, And so Mexico has always had this kind of love-hate relationship with the United States. On
Right.
one hand, they like the economy, they like the jobs, they like the opportunities, gung ho. But on another level, they also hate us because originally 7 of the states in the West were Mexican
Right.
or Spanish, to be more
Right.
exact. And there's still a lot of cultural ties to the Western United States. And there are some bad memories in terms of the Spanish-American War and the aftermath of all that. So Mexico has a history here where they would be inclined to want to get back into their old territories, the 7 Western states. And guess what? The Spanish government left a bequest of gold for those 7 Western states called the Guadalupe Hidalgo Trust. Okay, it's a treaty trust. And what had happened, just very briefly, so that you all know this, after the war, the Spanish-American War, and Spain was ceding all this land to the United States, they set up a trust because they had, prior to the war, issued bonds. And the idea behind these gold bonds was that they would get investors to invest in the Western states, and that investment would be used to build infrastructure in the Western states. And at that point, this meant trains and roads and bridges and things of this nature. And they were bonding this so that they could pay for all this. So they issued these bonds, these gold bonds. And the deal was that when the bonds matured, the investor could either get the gold or they could get the land. And some of the investors would take the land and some would take the gold. But overall, there would be a net benefit in gold because not all the investors would take the gold payment. Okay, so this was the Spanish scheme. They were issuing these gold bonds and they were also giving this land option in hopes that they'd get more people to move out west and invest in the West and have homes and ranches and stuff in the West. Well, then the war came, and these bonds have already been issued. So the Spanish, in order to settle the war issues, had to put up the money to pay off those bonds. So they put up the money to pay off the bonds in gold, and they left them, they deposited them with the Mexican government in the Bank of Mexico City. So all this gold, which was set aside to pay off the gold bonds that the Spanish government issued prior to the Spanish-American War, was in a bank in Mexico City. And there it remained. Okay.
Right.
For basically, 150 years. And it's gathering, it's being invested, it's being used, it's doing its gold thing for 150 years. Meantime, the value of gold is going up and up and up and up and up. So then all of a sudden, we jerk awake and we realize, let's see, there's essentially $33 trillion worth of gold sitting in the bank in Mexico City that is property of the Guadalupe Hidalgo Trust that was supposed to be either paid off or transferred for the benefit of those 7 Western states eons ago. And suddenly everybody is looking at this and kind of cocking their head one way or the other. Well, what happened to the bonds? So far, we found 2 boxes of bonds that could be issued out in gold against that gold in Mexico City. And the rest, only God knows.
Wow.
We just don't know. People bought the bonds over 100 years ago, and we don't know who they are, where they are, what happened to the bonds. They're long gone. So we're at the point now where we pay off the boxes we found, the bonds that have come forward, we pay them off. And the rest of the gold and assets that were attached then go to the benefit of the 7 Western states. Well, gee.
Sounds like a
Think
win.
about it. Why wouldn't the Mexicans want to come right across our border and share in this largesse? Especially
Right.
since the loss of that gold in their central bank means that their economy and their investment base is going to tank.
Right.
All right? So the Mexicans are highly motivated because of this Guadalupe Hidalgo trust interest issue in moving as many of their people north into our country as possible. Not only because they're going to be in a bad economic situation if this happens and they don't share it, right?
Right.
But also because it's becoming more and more of an issue and they don't know how to resolve it.
Right.
I mean,
Right. Sure.
and so you begin to see that there are powers and there are issues that extend beyond our borders that moderate toward a North American Union and a quote unquote regional government. But more and more, it's looking like this movement trying to add states to our United States. And the Brits are just crazy on this. The Brits, who've been running all of these incorporated governments all over the world, want us to accept the idea of the state of Israel incorporated being one of the American states. And again, it's their loony, imaginary legal fiction states.
Right.
But they want us to become responsible for defending and putting money into Israel. Because the lease is up, the Balfour Declaration is dead, so they want us to pick up where they left off and secure all their investments and all of their strategies that surround Israel.
And take their debts.
And take their debts. Yes. So, yes, always. So, folks, there's a lot more going on here than you can even imagine. But our international business assemblies are going to have to be up to speed on, guess what? International business.
Right.
They're going to have to know all this stuff. And they're
Right.
going to be the ones that act on all this stuff on behalf of our states. And ultimately, yes, our whole country, because the international business assemblies, acting as a federation by roll call vote, can do anything they want. And later down the path, as they are a confederation too, they can also do things for the entire country. I think most important at the present moment for us, this was our subject of the day, so we kind of got a review of the entire constitutional structure, and
That's needed.
yeah,
It
it's
was
needed.
needed.
But here's the first take-home point about your international business assemblies. International business assemblies are populated by state citizens.
Yes.
And we know that citizen means that you have an obligation to serve the government. Obviously, state citizens have an obligation to serve their state government. And in that capacity, they are unique. They are single-minded. They are here for their state. They don't have an obligation to the federal government. They don't have an obligation to the county government. They don't have an obligation to any foreign contractor or foreign government. They are here for their state of the union. Okay, so that's who the state citizens are.
Right.
Now, what can they do? Well, here's number one, and it's a biggie. The state citizens are the ones that approved all three constitutions. The state citizens are the ones that can enforce the constitutions.
Right.
Now, all these years, people have gone around and they've whined and cried about, oh, our constitutional rights are being taken away. Our constitutional rights are being trampled. We're what are we going to do? How can we get enforcement?
That means that you've given your rights away and you've not done your job to stand up and create the enforcement.
And the enforcement is the state citizens that are party to the constitutional contracts are the ones that have the leverage to enforce the Constitution.
Correct.
So this is job one for the international business assemblies, is to provide that leverage and enforcement as the parties to the contract.
Right.
So, all right.
So Anna, we've got it is 6 minutes until the hour. And I think we're going to have to stop right here. And I'm going to save the questions. I saved them out. So maybe next week we can take some of the questions, but then we can continue with this conversation, because this is really important for our people to comprehend what our business really is in international business and where we start, right? Where's the starting point?
Right.
Where's the starting line?
Let's face it.
Yeah.
We have to do all of it.
Correct. All right, everybody. Well, I hate to cut Anna short, but I know she's got another obligation. So thank you all for attending. Anna, thanks so much for the information.
Lisa knows that I need a bathroom break after my liquid breakfast. Right? This is what she's doing. She's very kind, very considerate. Anyway.
All right. Thank you, Anna. Lisa. We will see you next Tuesday.
Take care, dear.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.